Hi guys, today we are going to break apart an FRQ. We're going to use a 2012 FRQ from AP Human Geography. And I love using this FRQ to teach kids how to write an FRQ because I think it's one of the most approachable free response questions that AP Human has put out there for you guys. And I like using it because you already bring to the table a lot of prior knowledge, which makes this really, really approachable. Okay, so this particular FRQ was written in 2012 and it has the standard FRQ format. So whenever you have an FRQ put in front of you, and the way that the format works is you'll take your multiple choice exam at the beginning of your test, and then you'll have a short 10-minute break or so where you'll get a chance to get up, stretch your legs, drink some water, that kind of stuff. And then you'll go back and you'll complete the FRQ. And so when you have the written portion of your exam, you'll have three separate FRQs, which will run at about 25 minutes apiece. And so you need to allow yourself about 5 minutes to plan, or what I call kind of like brain dumping, or, basically vomiting all of that, mentally vomiting all that you have in your planning section of your document, and then go to write. And I'm a big, big believer in having some kind of outline or just even jotting some words down. Don't let the term outline kind of dissuade you. I know a lot of kids get really freaked out when I say outline. All I really mean is just make sure that you know where you're going, because when you're in the process of writing these FRQs, and whether it's in a classroom or whether it's at the actual day of your AP exam, you're going to be stressed. And when you're stressed, your amygdala's firing, and it's really difficult for all that information that's floating around in your brain to actually get to where you can utilize it. So, in addition to using some calming techniques, some breathing techniques, I always like to tell my kids to please make sure that you jot some stuff down. It doesn't have to be anything formal, just so you kind of have like a roadmap to where you want to go to write. So, for this particular FRQ, this one is a really approachable one because it talks about stuff that you already know, and especially those of us that live in border states along Mexico, or even with regards to Canada and the United States, this one's a pretty easy one. For those of you in other countries around the world, I know that you guys get this as well. So the FRQ, and let me just kind of zoom in here. The FRQ starts this way, and one thing that you need to know about AP Human FRQs is there's not going to be a long set of documents that you need to read. Typically, you're going to have some kind of stimulus material. This particular one has no stimulus material, so that's something to think about as well. There's no chart, no graph, nothing like that. Just simply a short little, almost like a mini little thesis statement that you're going to have to use to get your brain up and ready to go. So this particular one starts off this way. Walls and other barriers built by countries to establish their borders are some of the oldest and most controversial elements in the cultural landscape. So immediately your brain should be thinking about things like, Trump and the wall and all those other things, or maybe you're thinking the Berlin Wall, or maybe you're thinking the Great Wall of China. Something should have floated into your brain, some kind of prior knowledge that you're able to access, okay? So then we go to part A. Part A says identify three, and how many? Three. Three examples of walls or other barriers built by countries in the 20th and 21st centuries. Okay, so right off the bat, if you are jotting notes down, you know that you need to have three, and it's going to be walls or other barriers built by countries in the 20th and 21st century. So let's kind of brainstorm here. So brainstorming, we should be thinking about things like, okay, what's a wall that I know about? Okay, well, I know about the wall between Texas and Mexico. Maybe I know about the Great Wall of China. I know there's a wall, I don't know, maybe in Berlin somewhere. I've heard about that one before. I can't really think of anything else right now, so let me kind of just jot some. I'll come back to that one, okay? So that's what your brain should be doing as you're reading through these questions, okay? Then we're going to go on to the next one. Explain the purpose of one of the examples that you identified in part A. Okay, so this is where you have to choose, and you have to kind of go back to the ones that you identified in part A and then say, okay, I'm going to write about this. So whenever you're looking at an identify prompt is going to be one that you just can answer in a complete sentence. I highly, highly caution you As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you, do not just write some words down under the identify prompt. It is much better to restate the question in a complete sentence with your answer. So, for instance, three examples of walls or other barriers built by countries in the 20th and 21st centuries are. Now that I've restated that, I realize that I can't really say Great Wall of China because I know that the Great Wall of China is old, and I know that the 20th century is going to be in the 1900s, and the 21st century will be in the 2000s. So Great Wall of China won't work there. So now I got to think of some other stuff to put there. But that's okay because I'm just kind of brainstorming right now, right? So explain one purpose of one of the examples that you identified in part A. So I'm going to pick one that I know really, really well, which will be the border between Texas and Mexico. Okay, I live in Texas, and this is something that's discussed all the time. And of course, now it's part of the national conversation. And so I can talk about that one. And then finally, if I look at part C, it says for each of the categories listed below, discuss a consequence faced by countries as a result of walls or other barriers established along their borders. And so now we're looking at social or political, economic or environmental. And of course, this is where we pull in that whole ESPN concept, economic, social, political, and environmental. And here we see it playing out in an FRQ. And I've told you before that ESPN is a concept that you need to know for human geography, most certainly, because it's always a great way to help you prep for material for FRQs. Okay, so now let's go back and answer part A. If I'm answering part A, and remember, we're answering in complete sentences, I'm going to say three examples of walls or other barriers built by countries in the 20th and 21st centuries are the wall between the United States and Mexico, the Berlin Wall, and why don't we throw in there the DMZ, the wall that's between North and South Korea. Okay, so that would be my answer. It's pretty simple, just as simple as that. Part B, explain the purpose of one of the examples that you identified in part A. Okay, so I would say, because, and remember, I'm explaining, so the verb, whenever you have a verb command like explain, that means that you're writing, and you need to write in more than just one sentence, okay? The purpose of the Berlin Wall was it was a barrier that separated out East and West Berlin at the beginning of the Cold War. It was designed to prevent people leaving the communist side of East Berlin and entering into the free side of West Berlin, the side that was controlled by Western forces. Okay, something along those lines. And then finally, when I'm looking for part C, each of the categories listed below discuss a consequence faced by countries as a result of walls or other barriers. Okay, so a social consequence or I would say probably a social consequence. A social consequence of a wall or other barrier. Now notice something here. Notice that it doesn't say specifically part B. So it's not saying, let me see if I can grab my little marker here. It's not saying to reference this, what you said in part B. And you need to understand that for these FRQs, it would be really, really clear. It would say, for each of the categories listed below, discuss a consequence faced by countries, using the material that you used in part B, and then you would have to touch back on it. This one doesn't say that at all. So it's telling you that you have a little bit of freedom. Let me see if I can figure out how to erase this. You have a little bit of freedom here to be able to, I'm not very good at using this, I guess. You have a little bit of freedom to be able to respond, okay? So I discussed a social consequence would be separation of families. You have, families that are separated with a wall or other barrier. Think about the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall was built basically as people were the citizens of Berlin were separated, and the wall pretty much, I don't want to say it went up overnight, but it did, and people were really trying to move as quickly as possible over to the free side so that they weren't going to be separated with their family members. Okay, so looking at the economic consequences of a wall or other barrier, let's take a look at the wall between Mexico and the United States and think about all the arguments that you've heard about the walls and why we need to have a wall or why we don't need to have a wall. Think about the, kind of the bantering that goes back and forth with regards to that. And I think one of the things that comes up over and over again Now remember, the term here is consequence, right? It's a consequence. Let me see if I get my highlighter out and do this again. A consequence. So we're thinking it's gonna be something negative. The term consequence connotates a negative. This is not a positive. You don't necessarily want to say I have a positive consequence for you. Consequences are thought to be negative. So what would be a negative effect faced by countries as a result of walls or other barriers? Well, in this case, you could say, okay, part of the problem with having a wall is that it decreases the possibility for people to earn money, or maybe you have fewer job opportunities for people to be able to, support their families, or maybe you have decreased amounts of labor of people that need to do jobs. So that would be some economic consequences. You could also talk about how maybe there's a decrease in illegal goods that travel back and forth. So those would all be some examples of consequences. And then finally, some environmental consequences. And this would be a challenging one, I think, for most students, because you could think about social and political and economic, but to try and make an environmental connection with regards to walls, that might be a challenge for you. So in a case like this, if you don't know, just let me give you some friendly advice. Don't ever leave it blank. I still want you to have the opportunity to try and earn points. And sometimes, even if it sounds crazy, at least give yourself the opportunity to earn those points. You may or may not get the points, but at least attempt it. Okay. So an environmental consequence could be something along the lines of maybe it disrupts, maybe it causes damage to the environment in the construction of building the wall. You have to tear down, trees or some of the natural, flora. Maybe it disrupts migration patterns of animals because now you have this big wall there. Birds are a different story, but other animals, if you have a wall there, they can't climb over the wall, and so there could be some environmental damages that way. So for the most part, this is a really great FRQ to just kind of practice with. And I want you to think about where the points would be. This is an older style FRQ, so the new FRQs aren't going to necessarily look this way, because this whole business of having it breaking it out into sections, so see 1, 2, 3, these are now going to be pulled into being like Part D, Part E, Part F. AP Human has adjusted how they're going to ask you these questions now. But I still love using old FRQs just to kind of see the type of questions that they may ask. It's really good practice to get you thinking, but you have to be really, really careful when you're using old FRQs not to try and memorize these items, because FRQs at their essence are about you applying vocabulary terms and the concepts of the class. Okay, it's actually, to me, a short answer like this is the very best way for me as a teacher to understand your knowledge, because there's no place to hide. I mean, let's be honest, on a multiple choice exam, especially on like an AP exam, there are always two answer choices that could be the correct answer, right? A good choice makes it a good test for you as a student. It should be challenging between two answer choices. But an FRQ, I mean, you're pretty much just there having to write. There's no place for you to hide. And of course, this is why understanding vocabulary and to be able to apply your vocabulary is so very important. I give my students, long lists of vocab words that they groan and moan about. But at the end of the day, when test day rolls around, the first thing that they say when they come into my classroom is, I am so glad. I hated doing those vocabulary cards, but I'm so glad, Mrs. Smart, that you made me do those vocab cards, because that's ultimately what helped me in the end. So I hope this helps. This little breakdown helps for you to understand how to write an FRQ. And I will try and do a few more of these for you. Have a great afternoon.